Hey fans, in this episode we're retelling Southwick, Massachusetts' most infamous murder. It took place in 1938 and is arguably the most well-known true crime story in Southwick history, thanks in part to the victim's recognizable name, but more so the horrendous nature of the crime and perhaps the murder weapon too. The Southwick Time Machine's version, titled A Dark Day on Vining Hill, was featured in the March 2022 edition of Southwick's magazine. Now the Southwick Time Machine's online and print versions of the story are more scaled down than what we're about to cover in this format, primarily due to some additional biographical information that falls at the end of this video, so be sure to watch or listen until the end. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So here we go. Martha Ottenheimer was thought to be suicidal. On December 30th, 1937, a judge ordered her to be committed to the Northampton State Hospital for depression, and she entered the notorious lunatic asylum the following day, New Year's Eve. However, when her husband Francis fell ill, he urged authorities to release her. When Martha was initially granted parole on February 11th, 1938, she immediately returned to her family's homestead on their namesake hill in Southwick, Massachusetts. Vining Hill was a place the Vinings had called home for more than a century. Almost a year before Martha's release, her widowed father, Lester Vining, who still lived in the old farmhouse there, had fallen ill but was doing better. Francis and Martha lived there too. Anyway, Martha returned to the insane asylum on her own accord on the 13th. However, under pressure from Martha's husband, authorities deemed her cured and they permanently released her on February 16th, and once again she returned to Vining Hill. Several people who remarked on Martha's splendid recovery were surprised when they found out that she repeatedly struck her father in the head with an axe as he sat in a chair in his kitchen after checking his mailbox on April 13th, 1938. Francis, still ill, was laid up in an upstairs bedroom when the attack occurred. Having heard the commotion, he rose from his bed and went downstairs to investigate. As soon as Francis entered the kitchen, he made the shocking and gruesomely bloody discovery. Martha phoned Southwick Dr. Samuel Finson. Dr. Finson, a friend of the Vining family, was one of the doctors who had Martha committed to the insane asylum in 1937 following a failed suicide attempt. Dr. Finson was not home at the time, so Martha left a message for him with the telephone operator, saying in part, "I've murdered my father. You better come and look at him." When Dr. Finson got the message, he notified the Massachusetts State Police and rushed to Vining Hill. Lester Vining was clinging to life. Dr. Finson found him lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood pouring out of his head. Martha was stretched out on a couch rambling on, freely admitting that she killed her father and that she would finish off her husband too, having the deranged belief that Francis was half dead. Dr. Finson responding officers rendered first aid. They had Lester removed to Noble Hospital. Now, it's unclear if Lester was dead on arrival at Noble or if he died there about 1:15 p.m. Anyway, an autopsy showed he had multiple skull fractures after reportedly being hit in the head with an axe some 20 times. Francis later told investigators that Martha told him that her father wanted to get up from his chair to get a pill. She told him not to, and when he started to get up, she struck him with the axe. Massachusetts State Police immediately returned Martha to the Northampton State Hospital, where she was recommitted and housed with the dangerously insane. Under questioning from authorities, Martha admitted that she killed her father because he was old and feeble, and she did not want to see him suffer. She was also apparently under the belief that he was starving to death. The district attorney had not formally charged Martha, but a grand jury would hear evidence of the horrific murder when it convened on May 2nd. That was pretty much common practice in the Bay State. Following the Briggs Law of Massachusetts, which was enacted in 1921, the Massachusetts Department of Mental Diseases announced on May 13, 1938, the appointments of Dr. McPherson, who was the superintendent of the notorious Belchertown State School for the Feeble-Minded, and Dr. Morgan Hopkins of the Monson State Hospital to conduct a pre-trial examination on Martha. And as diehard fans of the Southwick Time Machine will know, before settling on Belchertown, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts considered building a state school in Southwick on Sunnyside Ranch. Thankfully, that didn't happen. They opted for Belchertown instead. The Belchertown State School, a school in name only, was known for its horrific living conditions and for the inhumane treatment of the children institutionalized there. Like the Northampton State Hospital, it was an underfunded dumping ground, except this time for troubled youth. It was understaffed, there was a lot of kids, they would roam the massive property. I mean, it was like 800 acres. The kids would roam naked, they were covered in feces, some would be strapped to beds and left unattended for days with no form of entertainment or care. Some patients were force-fed by the overworked, uncaring staff. Others drank from toilets to get needed water. Kids were routinely injured or abused by staff members. Several patients turned up dead. The school even had its own cemetery on the grounds. There were all sorts of issues, plumbing issues. Most of the buildings in the network of underground tunnels had the grossest smells as the property fell into neglect. It was absolutely horrific, and it operated that way for decades in its 77-year history. Anyway, the Briggs Law intended to bridge the gap between psychiatry and criminal law. Named for Dr. Briggs, it required the appointment of 2 psychiatrists to examine each person held on a capital offense. In doing so, the Bay State hoped to eliminate costly drawn-out trials for those found to be of unsound mind, but only if the defense attorney did not contest the insanity findings. And just to note, Chapter 888 of the Massachusetts Act of 1970 repealed Briggs Law effective November 1st, 1971. Anyway, before the murder of Lester Vining, the notorious Northampton State Hospital was under investigation when it paroled Eleanor Randall of Agawam in 1937. Roughly 2 weeks after her release, she suffocated her 23-month-old daughter when she stuffed her into a steamer trunk that she may have mistaken for a crib on February 12th. Her husband, Frederick, found the infant's body the following day. Anyway, with gross overcrowding and rapidly eroding conditions, along with the public's perception of mental health treatment changing, the Northampton State Hospital eventually transferred patients to other facilities as it faced renewed calls for closure. Some patients were simply released back into society because over the years, the underfunded insane asylum had become a dumping ground for those who could not care for themselves. Instead of offering proper and patient mental health care, it became a warehouse for the poor, the homeless, and the elderly who had nowhere to go. It's unclear what exactly happened to Martha, but by 1950 she was transferred to the Norwich State Hospital in Norwich, Connecticut, which opened in 1904 as the Norwich State Hospital for the Insane, before its name was shortened to Norwich State Hospital sometime around 1926. And it's just to note, when it first opened, it housed 95 patients, but by the time Martha arrived, that number had swelled to more than 3,000. And it too faced the same fate as the Northampton State Hospital. So Lester Vining, he was buried in Southwick Cemetery. His full name was Lester Reed Vining. Reed was his mother's maiden name. Anyways, Lester, he's appeared on the Time Machine before, most notably because he was one of the two Vining boys who savagely beat Will Stibble at the Southwick Hotel. Now that's today's Southwick Inn. That beating occurred in November 1873. And Will Stibble, he was never the same after Lester and Lester's older brother Jasper violently attacked him. In 1880, Will slit his throat ear to ear as authorities came to take him back to Northampton Insane Asylum, which was later renamed Northampton State Hospital. And just to note, Jasper Vining died suddenly on April 13th, 1926. You can read A Dark Day on Vining Hill online at www.southwicktimemachine.com. The complete story is there, including any edited out portions and additional research notes. You can also find the Southwick tragedy there. That's the story that mentions a violent attack on Willis Dipple. Anyways, if you liked the video story, click the like button and drop a comment below. It's feedback and interaction from fans that keeps the Time Machine going. And if you find yourself in Southwick in October, be sure to check out the Southwick Historical Society's annual Spirit Walk at the Old Cemetery. They got pretty cool stuff happening there. It's interesting to check out. Just to note, the Southwick Time Machine and the Southwick Historical Society aren't affiliated in any way, but please support our local history. Anyway, before we wrap up, here's a little more information on Martha and the Vinings I promised earlier. So Lester Vining married Clara Warner on October 11th, 1874. Clara gave birth to Martha on October 20th, 1887. Martha married Raymond Clifford Combs, an electrician, at the Methodist Church in Southwick on November 24th, 1909, and the couple moved into a boarding house in Elm Street in neighboring Westfield before moving to nearby Springfield. When Clara died in 1911, Raymond was one of the pallbearers. Anyway, for reasons unknown, Martha left her and Raymond's home in 1914, and at some point moved in with her widowed sister Orpha and her partner who lived on Spring Street in Springfield. Now, Orpha's husband, Dr. Porter, fans will recognize that name as he's appeared on the Southwick Time Machine before. Anyways, Dr. Porter and Orpha got married at the Southwick Congregational Church on the evening of October 11th, 1899. It's just note that they used the Episcopal service along with a Methodist minister, assisted by a reverend of the Congregational Church. Anyways, Dr. Porter, he died on April 12, 1916, and following his death, Orpha went back to live with her father on Vining Hill before moving to Westfield and Springfield. And it's interesting to note that around 2 a.m. on July 21st, 1915, authorities in West Springfield, Massachusetts, found an abandoned car with its front wheel smashed in and a broken axle. The events surrounding the damaged car were unknown, but the car was registered to Orpha. Anyway, by 1920, Martha was working as a coat clerk at a candy factory. Now, it's unclear if Martha ever returned to Raymond, but on June 27, 1923, a judge granted Raymond divorce on the grounds of desertion. Now, just to note that Martha kept using the last name Combs instead of reverting to her maiden name Vining. While she didn't go back to being a Vining, she did return to Vining Hill. Now, Orpha, she died in 1930. She had been working as a nurse, and it's just note that Martha was working as a live-in nurse in Southwick, apparently for Walter Saunders and his older wife, Hattie. And as diehard fans of the Southwick Time Machine may recall, Walter Saunders owned the historic Cannon Hotel at Congamon Lake when it burned to the ground from a chimney fire in 1930. Anyway, it's unclear how they met, but Martha eventually married Francis J. Ottenheimer. It's also to note that Lester Vining's younger brother, Foster Vining, was struck and killed by an automobile as he was walking down the street by his home on May 6, 1939. So what do you think? Did the mental health system fail Martha? Let me know your thoughts, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, because you never know where the Southwick Time Machine will go next as we continue our mission of preserving history through storytelling. Thank you for watching.